Hello again, I am Blunty. Well, I don't read many comics these days. Comics were indeed very, very important to me in my adolescence. I had no real worthy adult role models by which to frame my life, by which to try and navigate my way into growing into the man I wanted to become instead of a complete tool bag like most of the adults that were around me when I was younger. So I found comics, and I looked at comics. I looked at Superman, I looked at Batman to try and find some sort of moral compass about how to be a decent person while dealing with other issues of my own. Because one of the other things that was very difficult for me in my youth is I was undiagnosed as bipolar. I was undiagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. I was undiagnosed with social anxiety issues. All of those things sort of roll into one another and sort of interplay in a lovely soup mix that makes my brain just not work as well as some people's brains are supposed to work. And I found that very, very difficult. And today on Bleeding Cool, as you can see on the panel beside me here, there's a story about Superman coming out, basically. And it's Superman revealing his identity to the world. Now, there have been lots of different stories where Superman has revealed his identity as Clark Kent to people around him, or it's been exposed, or, there's been all kinds of different angles of this sort of being examined. What happens when everybody knows Clark Kent is Superman and vice versa. But this is the first one framed up in this way, and I think it might be the most fascinating way yet, because Superman himself is coming out as Clark. He's telling the world as Clark. He's telling people around him as Clark, and the language that's being used feels a lot like the language that when people come out as gay or lesbian or bisexual or intergender or transsexual, or, any number of sexual or gender identities that diverge from the normal. It feels a lot like that. And I've had this conversation with people who've come out to me. I've been on the other end of it. But Brian Bendis, Ivan Rice, and Joe Prado a response for this comment. And Brian Bendis spoke to NBC News, in which he said, I expressed that this is a story about Clark owning his stuff. You literally have been looking at Clark accidentally revealing his identity since the beginning. It's the biggest cliche in comics, and was getting bigger and bigger with every year that Superman evolved. I inherited a father and a husband and someone much more locked into the world than the young Clark Kent who joined the Daily Planet and was trying to figure out his world all by himself, the lone immigrant refugee. And that's the classic Superman story, the lone immigrant refugee. That was the metaphor that was Superman. He was a lone immigrant. But the Superman that exists in comics right now, I'm not going to go into the whole path of how he got there, because there's actually a different Superman, and then he died, and then the Superman from a different world took over, and this Superman had a beard at one point. He was just flying around in a black suit being secret Superman. And but he's married to Lois Lane. He's quite mature, and he's got a kid. I think his kid's in the teenage years by this point in the comics and things like that. So it's a very, very different Superman. And this is how he's sort of coming out. This is how this Superman's coming out. My name is Clark Kent. I'm a reporter for the Daily Planet and have been ever since I moved here from Smallville, Kansas. So just sort of introducing himself there. But hey, I'm Clark Kent, but he's in the Superman. Oh! I can and do trust. He's speaking to Jimmy at this point. I can and do trust you, and I'm sorry I ever made you feel I couldn't. You've been a loyal and good friend for as long as we've known each other, and sometimes you've gotten into real trouble just because you know me. Jimmy responds with a little quip about not having to pay for stuff because he knows Superman. And Clark puts back on his glasses and sweeps his hair back and sort of relaxes his face. See, look at the artwork here. That's Superman. That's Clark Kent. You could sort of believe that people wouldn't believe they were the same person. Just the way he's controlling the muscles in his face, these super face muscles to change the shape of his face and put his glasses on and sweep his hair back. Then he says to Jimmy, you can take the picture. So he comes out to Jimmy, but there's another panel in the same article that explains why the two identities. Here's where we get into some real interesting stuff. Why the two identities? As a child, everybody thought it best that I had as normal life as possible. Sounding familiar to some of you, I'm sure. That came with an identity. I was being trained almost like an athlete to be the best Superman I could be. So he's sort of talking about how the identity as a normal person was training him to be the best man he could be. I lived, went to school, fell in love, got married, had a child. A lot has happened. See, as long as I've kept this big part of myself a secret, there were good reasons, and the general reason for the secret identity in superhero comics, of course, protect the loved ones. If everybody knew Superman was married to Lois Lane or was best friends with Jimmy, but that sort of association already exists. That's why Jimmy and Lois get kidnapped so often, at least in the older comics. But the point is, he didn't want people going after his ma and pa and things like that to try and get to Superman via Clark Kent's, vulnerable human people. So that, keep it a secret to try and protect them. And that makes some amount of sense, but it also spoke to me, and this is where we're going to get into with this dialogue here. I had to put on an identity when I was growing up, because I had to try and hide these parts of me that made me different. Because as a Gen X kid, it's a little bit different these days with more and more gender politics and not gender politics, but identity politics, and understanding and awareness of various issues and mental health things. But back in the day, you were just a bully for a target, a target for a bully for a target for a bully. And I got bullied quite heavily. So I learned to suppress and hide and repress certain parts of my identity. Now, I'm not saying this is the same thing as someone coming out as trans or gay or whatever. I'm just saying it is a similar experience from a different side of the fence, basically, just having to suppress part of yourself so you don't get singled out, so you don't get stomped on, so you don't get, hey, that guy's different. So that doesn't become what people see when they look at you. You want them to see you as a person and not as that guy's got bipolar. He's just acting weak because he's bipolar and just write you off because of that. It was one of my biggest fears, of people not taking me seriously when I get passionate or excited or angry about something. They could just write that off as, oh, he's just cycling. Just don't worry about him. Leave him alone. It may have been, well, I may have been cycling, but I also may have been something that was important to me that I was trying to communicate, that I had trouble communicating because of my other issues. Superman continues, or Clark Kent continues. But all the while, I'm trying to empower others to tell truth and justice. And that's one of the things that stuck out about me with Superman as well. He's always hiding part of his identity. But of course, Superman's always been truth, justice, and the American way, although the American way part has kind of fallen by the wayside in the last 20 or so years because, well, America hasn't always been the world's favorite person, really. My life as Clark Kent is something I'm deeply proud of, and keeping it secret today, that feels false. And that's the line almost verbatim that I've heard from a couple of different people when they came out to me for, whatever they were coming out for, in that maintaining that identity and keeping sort of part of themselves that is important to them and who they are and how they interact with the world, having to keep that secret, it just starts feeling false. They feel like they're just lying. And I never really felt that way with suppressing my issues. I didn't feel like I was lying to anybody about who and what I was. I was just suppressing the part that would sort of put people off, basically. So it might be a similar thing. People are, gender and sexual identities might be frightened. They put some of their friends or family off in that way. Again, I don't want to say I've gone through the same thing, because clearly I haven't, but different issue, different side of the fence, same mood, as the kids might say, to a lesser extent, perhaps. So what now? Well, I'm going to continue with Superman, and I'm going to find my way as Clark Kent. I love being a journalist. I'm going to continue being married to my amazing wife, Lois Lane, and continue to raise a child the best way we know. I know this is new and maybe confusing to some, but I'm proud of my heritage, both from Krypton and Earth. And here's the sort of immigrant thing coming in again. This is an important question. Is he going to keep the glasses? Because the glasses were part of the disguise. He's going to keep the glasses when he's wondering about his Clark Kent. Is he going to sweep his hair back anymore? Or is he going to let the spit curl fly? I don't know. But I saw this morning, and it resonated with me in a way that the whole thing about Superman's identity and him, trying to be a beacon of hope and justice and things like that as Superman, as Big Blue, versus just trying to keep connected to the world around him as Clark Kent, as just a man, and sort of having people treat him as a man instead of looking up to him as this sort of super powerful godlike figure and things like that. And that, again, plays into some of my concerns and why I kept a lot of who and what I am suppressed for a very long time, because I didn't want people to see me in the frame of only, my mental health issues and being dismissed based on that. And sort of this, I never even thought about it this way. I mean, I knew I related to sort of the dual identity thing and things like that, but I never really framed, and it never framed up in my mind quite as clearly as these few panels from the new Superman comic really does. And I think I might have to pick it up and read it to see how this falls out. It's Superman number 18, if you're looking for it, in your comic book store or on your comic book apps or whatnot. But yeah, let me know what you think. Does this, particularly to those of you who do sit on the other side of the cis white spectrum, does this ring true for you? Does this wording, does this language sort of feel something like you've felt or like you've said to other people? I'm just curious to see if this resonates with different differences more than it does with my difference. That was a very poorly constructed sentence. I apologize for that. I hope you know what I mean. I'm pretty sure you know what I mean. But yeah, just a few panels here on Bleeding Cool and the Superman story. And it's really clever, but also so obvious, so blindingly obvious. I'm kind of angry that it hasn't been done before in this way. So let me know what you think in the down below. Thanks for watching. I'm Blunty, and we'll catch you next time.